$10, Wesley Brandt said into the microphone, smiling as if he had offered dessert instead of his wife. 200 donors laughed beneath the chandeliers of the gala, champagne glasses chiming over white tablecloths and Riverview windows. I stood in my dark blue dress, holding the program card Marin Ellis's agency had printed for the night. The joke landed too cleanly, and when Marin smiled near the production table, I understood it had been rehearsed. Wesley turned one polished cuff toward me, letting the ballroom follow his hand as if I were part of the auction display. This is Adrienne, my wife, the woman who restores old books and somehow makes herself even quieter than the dust. The laughter rose quickly, warm and careless, while a board member tapped his glass for more. I kept my chin level because anger would have given Wesley another line, and silence was the only thing he had not scripted. Marin did not look embarrassed, only pleased, as if my stillness proved the room was finally learning my proper size. Tonight, we are auctioning dinner with my painfully useful on-paper wife, Wesley continued. We will start at $10, which feels generous if she discusses paper acidity before dessert. Someone repeated the number. Someone whistled, and the laughter spread across the ballroom. My fingers tightened around the program, bending Marin's logo across the fold, and that tiny crease felt like the first honest thing in the room. Then a man's voice came from the back, calm enough to shame the entire front row. $1 million. The silence did not fall gradually. It slammed shut, cutting off a laugh near the bar. Marin turned so fast one silver earring struck her jaw, and the surprise on her face told me she had planned the joke, not the consequence. Wesley blinked twice, then tried to recover with a laugh too thin for the room. I am sorry. Did someone say $1 million? The man stood with silver threaded through his hair and looked past Wesley as if the microphone no longer mattered. Yes. I do not pay symbolic money for public cruelty. Nobody laughed after that. The donors stared at their glasses, their spouses, anything except the woman they had helped price at $10. Wesley's smile stayed pinned for 1 second too long, and I watched him realize the stage he built for me had turned beneath his feet. I did not know Nolan Whitford yet, or the reason he had crossed that room with a number no one could dismiss. I only knew my husband had tried to sell my humiliation, and a stranger had made the whole ballroom remember I was not for sale. After Nolan Whitford's bid, Wesley finished the gala like a man trying to hold water in both hands. His voice still moved through sponsor names and closing thanks, but the rhythm had cracked, and everyone close enough heard it. Donors who had laughed at me minutes earlier now watched my face with careful interest, as if my silence had become expensive. Marin Ellis stayed near the production table, one hand pressed to her phone, no longer smiling. When Nolan reached my table, Wesley followed him quickly, wearing the thin public smile he used when losing control privately. My assistant can coordinate my wife's schedule, Wesley offered, but Nolan kept his attention on me. Not him. Mrs. Brandt, would you like dinner tomorrow evening? He asked, and the room seemed to wait for my husband's answer. I gave mine first, quietly enough for dignity, and clearly enough for damage. Yes. Wesley did not argue in front of donors, because even panic knew how to dress itself in manners. He closed the evening early, thanked everyone twice, and avoided Marin while she folded the printed program into her clutch. At home, after midnight, he loosened his tie in the kitchen and called the bid good publicity for the foundation. I asked why Marin looked scared if the money was good publicity, and his silence lasted just long enough to answer me. The next evening, Nolan waited inside a private dining room above a quiet restaurant near Oak Street, where the staff spoke softly and left quickly. He did not compliment my dress, ask about Wesley, or pretend the ballroom had been amusing. He placed a cream envelope beside my water glass and told me his mother's name was June Whitford. 12 years earlier, I had found June outside a closed courthouse records office, shaking beside one suitcase after losing her job and apartment. I remembered the rain first, then the paper cup of coffee, then the way June kept apologizing for needing help. I had offered my guest room for a week, which became 10 weeks, and helped her find transcription work through a retired clerk. Nolan watched recognition settle on my face and said, "You gave her time before fear made the next decision for her." His voice did not tremble, but the envelope between us suddenly felt heavier than the room. June's letter was brief, careful, and written like someone who had saved every word until it mattered. She had built a small legal records business, invested steadily, and left instructions for Nolan to find me face to face. The money was not gratitude alone. It belonged to a trust meant for women who needed short-term housing before their lives collapsed. I sat with that truth while Chicago moved outside the window. Understanding Wesley had priced me at $10, and June had spent 12 years proving him wrong. Greer Lawson's office sat above West Loop traffic, quiet enough that every page she turned sounded deliberate. Nolan had brought me there the morning after dinner, not to persuade me, but to make sure June Whitford's trust reached me through clean hands. Greer explained that June's investment account had grown for 12 years, separate from my marriage, protected by documents signed long before Wesley ever put me on that stage. "This is yours to accept or refuse," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "And if you accept, he cannot manage it for you." I read the trustee language twice because the words felt too steady for the life I had been living. Quiet Door Trust would fund short-term housing for women losing shelter after financial crisis, eviction, or sudden displacement. June had named me trustee, not mascot, not honorary chair, not another wife seated near a podium. Greer tapped one paragraph with her pen and reminded me not to sign anything from Larkin Civic Arts Fund until she reviewed it. That warning landed because Wesley had pushed 3 donor forms across our breakfast table the week before, saying, "Just sign where I marked." When I got home, I opened the shared Gala folder I had always managed because logistics were supposedly my harmless little territory. Nothing I accessed was private to Wesley, and nothing required breaking into anything. My name sat on the permission list beside Marin Ellis's agency. The invoices appeared first, polished and vague, charging strategy fees, premium donor experience planning, and audience engagement consulting. One payment had gone out before board approval, and another sat pending with Marin's initials inside the vendor note. Then I found the draft program. Marin had written the auction segment in a document titled Donor Humor Bridge, and Wesley had replied with a thumbs-up emoji and one sentence. "After this, Adrian will stop pretending she has a public role." I stared at the words until they stopped looking like language and became evidence. The humiliation had not wandered onto the stage by accident. It had walked in wearing a silver dress and carrying an invoice. By dinner, Wesley sensed the change before I explained anything, because guilty people notice silence faster than innocent ones. He asked whether Nolan wanted money, influence, or access, and I placed my water glass down before answering. "He wanted to return something you tried to take in front of 200 people. Wesley's face tightened, not because he understood, but because he did not know which loss had just begun. Upstairs, inside my bag, June's letter rested beside Marin's paper trail, and for the first time, my quiet life had documents strong enough to speak. I did not post the clip, call a donor, or turn my humiliation into a public confession booth. Greer Lawson took the folder, arranged the invoices, program draft, payment notes, and donor list download record, then prepared a confidential notice to the Larkin Civic Arts Fund board. The language was dry enough to survive lawyers and sharp enough to cut through manners. Conflict of interest, questionable vendor payments, donor data misuse, and potential private benefit sounded cleaner than betrayal, which was why it worked. Wesley received the notice during breakfast, with his coffee still steaming beside a plate he had barely touched. His eyes moved once to Marin Ellis's agency name, then back to me as if I had somehow placed it there with emotion instead of evidence. "You are trying to destroy the foundation because I embarrassed you," he said, keeping his voice low enough to sound reasonable. I placed Marin's donor humor bridge draft beside his cup and answered, "Which part hurt you more? Wesley, the evidence or the fact that you wrote it badly?" He did not pick up the paper. That told me more than any denial would have, because Wesley always handled documents when he believed he could control them. By noon, the board chair had called an emergency meeting, and by 3, I sat beside Greer in a glass conference room where nobody had chandeliers to hide beneath. Marin arrived as a vendor, not a guest, wearing a cream suit and the same practiced calm she had worn near the production table. Wesley entered last, polished and pale, carrying a folder too thin for a man with that many explanations. He tried the husband route first, describing me as hurt, reactive, and confused by nonprofit operations I had supposedly never understood. Greer let him speak until he reached the word misunderstanding, then opened her binder to the paid invoices with Marin's initials in the vendor notes. The board chair stopped tapping his pen when Greer matched those payments to missing approval minutes. Marin shifted in her chair, and the movement was small, but every person in that room saw her realize the joke had become accounting. Then Greer read the email Marin had written to Wesley after sending the draft program. "Once she looks pathetic enough, donors will understand why you need a sharper woman beside you." Nobody gasped, because professional rooms do not gasp when money and reputation are bleeding together. The silence simply changed temperature. Wesley looked at Marin. Marin looked at the table, and I understood that their affair had survived secrecy better than paperwork. The board froze all remaining payments to Marin's agency and placed Wesley on administrative leave pending outside review. They ordered donor records secured, vendor contracts preserved, and every related payment examined by an independent accountant. I did not need to raise my voice, because the pages had done what anger could not. Before leaving, I looked at Wesley and said, "I was priced at $10 in a room funded by Donor Trust. Now you know what that joke actually cost." The story moved through Chicago donor circles without my help, which made it harder for Wesley to call it personal revenge. 200 people had heard him price me at $10, and the board review had given that cruelty a balance sheet. 3 pledges paused within the same week, and one young donor wrote that she funded art access, not affair management. Wesley read that email twice at our kitchen island, then folded a joint statement from his coat pocket, like a final trick. He wanted us to call the gala a marital misunderstanding, the vendor payments, administrative confusion, and Marin's agency, an unfortunate optics issue. "You can still save the foundation," he said, standing where he had once pushed unsigned donor forms toward me. I read the first sentence, placed it back on the counter, and answered, "No, Wesley, you want me to notarize your lie?" His jaw tightened before his voice did, and that delay told me the statement had been written for donors, not truth. "You are destroying everything over one joke," he said, still avoiding the invoices stacked neatly beside his hand. "The joke was yours," I answered, keeping my palm flat on the paper, but the receipts were Marin's. He looked toward the hallway as if the woman who helped write his cruelty might rescue him from her own email trail. 20 minutes later, Marin Ellis stepped into my foyer uninvited, wearing a camel coat and panic, dressed as strategy. She accused me of using Nolan's money to ruin 2 careers that were simply better suited for public life. I opened Greer's settlement folder and placed Marin's email on the console between us, close enough for her to read. "You did not step into my marriage by accident," I told her, watching her eyes find the phrase deadweight wife. "You submitted a proposal." For the first time since the gala, Marin stopped looking like a mistress and started looking like a vendor. The paper made her a paid participant in humiliating me before donors while shifting foundation access toward herself. Wesley whispered her name, warning her not to speak, which proved they still believed control sounded like a man giving instructions. She backed toward the door with one hand closed around her phone. But nothing she could call would erase what she sent. The board's outside review ended without theater, which made the consequences feel cleaner and more permanent. Wesley resigned before removal became public, repaid disputed expenses through a negotiated settlement, and lost the donor rooms that once opened for him. Marin's agency was dropped by 2 major venues, flagged for vendor risk review, and audited after the questionable invoices reached the accountants. Nobody needed handcuffs for punishment to feel real, because their world had always depended on reputation, access, and invitations. During the divorce, Greer kept June Whitford's trust separate, untouched by Wesley's claims, exactly where the documents placed it. I signed the divorce papers in a glass-walled office, where Wesley Brandt looked smaller than any ballroom had ever allowed him to look. Greer Lawson kept the folder closed until he finished reading, and Nolan Whitford waited in the hallway because this ending belonged to me. Wesley apologized without polish, saying he had not understood what he was doing until every room stopped opening for him. I believed he understood the cost, but understanding was not the same as repair. I hope you learn the difference between being admired and being trusted, I told him, and his eyes dropped to the signature line. That was the last sentence I gave our marriage, because the rest belonged to quiet work. Wesley moved into small consulting, far from the donor rooms that once rose when he entered. Marin Ellis lost the luxury venues. Her agency survived in cheaper corners, and every invoice she ever called strategy became a warning label. Quiet Door Trust began with 3 short-term apartments, basic utilities, grocery cards, and legal referrals for women losing housing after financial shock. No gala announced it. No plaque carried my name. And no husband stood beside me, turning kindness into performance. The first woman held her key with both hands and whispered, "I can breathe tonight," before stepping into a clean, temporary room. June Whitford had been right, because one safe month could keep fear from choosing the rest of a life. Nolan stayed near the edges, never rushing the friendship into something loud enough to bruise it. A year later, after I approved the 25th placement, we had dinner near Oak Street without cameras, donors, or anyone measuring my worth. He asked how it felt, and I looked at the receipt folder Greer had returned to me that afternoon. Like I finally live in a room nobody can auction, I answered, and for the first time, the silence after my words felt entirely mine. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. If you have ever been underestimated while still choosing kindness, I hope Adrian's journey made you feel seen. Share where you are watching from. Leave your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories about finding peace after being broken open.